The spider had been building the same web for 3 days above the hot water pipes, and Harry Potter had been watching it, mostly because there was nothing else to do. He was in the cupboard under the stairs. He was always in the cupboard in the morning, until someone needed breakfast made. The summer had settled over Privet Drive like a damp cloth, and the small space beneath the staircase trapped the heat in a particular way. By 9 o'clock, it felt like pressing your face against a warm window. Harry sat on the edge of his cot with his knees drawn up and his glasses at the end of his nose. One lens was cracked across the corner. Both arms had been repaired with tape that had long since gone grey with use. He was thin and small for 10, and his hair was jet black and refused to lie flat no matter what was done to it. His eyes were very green behind those cracked lenses. He wore a pair of Dudley's old jeans, held up with a piece of string, and a T-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it, whose arms had been washed off in the laundry sometime last spring. He had been this thin at 9, and at 8, and he expected he would find a way to still be thin at 11. He was used to all of it in the way you got used to anything that had always been true. The smell of old wood and bicycle rubber in the narrow dark. The pipes that clicked when the house woke up. There was a lightning bolt scar on his forehead. He had always had it. The Dursleys said it was from the car crash that had killed his parents. He had never quite believed that. When Aunt Petunia called him for breakfast, he got up. He cooked the bacon. He set the table. He ate in his corner and washed up. And by 10 o'clock, the house at number 4 had assumed precisely the shape it always assumed, which was to say, nothing worth noticing. Harry was at the sink, finishing the last of the dishes, when he noticed the woman at the end of the road who wasn't doing anything. She was just standing there. People on Privet Drive moved with purpose. They had dogs or shopping bags or somewhere to be. This woman simply stood at the edge of the pavement and looked at the house, and there was something about the quality of her stillness that made Harry feel she had been looking at it for some time before he noticed her. She was broad-shouldered, with very short grey hair, and she wore dark clothes that were wrong for the summer in some way he couldn't precisely name. There was a small circle of glass in one eye that caught the morning light when she turned her head. She was not looking at the road. She was looking at the house. The doorbell rang. Vernon went to the door. Harry drifted to the kitchen doorway, where he could see down the length of the hall. Up close, the woman was exactly what she had been from a distance. Substantial, square-jawed, with her jaw set in the manner of someone who has decided something well in advance and does not expect to be reconsidered. She held a document in one hand. A seal on it caught the light in the same odd way as the glass in her eye. "Mr. Vernon Dursley," she said. It was not a question. "I am Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Ministry of Magic. I have a warrant for inspection of this premises." Vernon went purple. He went purple the way a kettle goes to boil, fast, and with a great deal of noise. He drew himself to his full height and told her that they were perfectly normal people, that they wanted no part of any of this, that if she did not remove herself from his step, he would call the police and tell them everything about this freakery. "The warrant compels entry," she said. She said it the way a stone wall doesn't move when you lean against it. Vernon shouted about rights. He mentioned Scotland Yard. He mentioned that he had a very good solicitor. Amelia Bones waited for him to finish and then walked through the door. Petunia had appeared at the kitchen doorway, very close to Harry. He glanced at her and looked away again almost immediately. Her hands were wrapped tight around the front of her apron. Her face had done something he didn't have a name for. Not Vernon's hot, furious red, but something that had gone thin and pale instead, something older than anger behind her eyes. She was watching Amelia Bones move through the hallway with the precise, fixed attention of someone who has been expecting a particular thing and has now seen it arrive. She knew. Whatever this woman represented, Petunia Dursley already knew. Amelia Bones stopped at the door under the stairs. She looked at the bolt on the outside. She slid it back. She opened the door and was quiet for a long moment, looking at the cot and its single blanket, at the old bicycle parts Harry had been sleeping beside all winter because there wasn't room to move them, at the crayon marks on the wall from when he was very small and hadn't yet understood that drawing on walls was not allowed, the spider's web, 3 days old now, above the pipes. Then she crossed to the telephone table in the hall and opened the drawer as though she had been told exactly which one, and took out the school records. She read the address written there. The cupboard, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, and set them down. She looked at Harry. "Would you come with me to the sitting room?" she said. He came. She sat across from him squarely, which was not the way adults in this house usually positioned themselves near him. They tended to look past him or through him. This woman looked at him directly. She had a notebook. Her pen moved in near silence when she wrote. She asked him his name and his age and where he slept. He told her. He answered the way he answered most things. Plainly, without drama, watching her face for the signal that he'd said something wrong. The cupboard, yes, always, until recently when the letters came addressed to it, and Vernon moved him. The scar. He'd had it as long as he could remember. They said it was from the car crash. He had never quite believed that. Things happened sometimes that he couldn't explain. The hair that grew back when Petunia cut it too short, the teacher's wig that turned blue, the school roof, the time Dudley's gang was chasing him, and he'd ended up on top of the kitchen somehow. Last month at the zoo, there was a boa constrictor in a glass enclosure, and the glass had simply gone, and the snake had left, and he'd been talking to it a moment before, which was probably the strangest part. The signal didn't come. She wrote things down. She looked at him with steady, dark eyes behind her monocle, and at no point did her expression do the thing that adult expressions in this house always did when he described things that happened around him. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "I'll be back in just a moment." He sat in the sitting room and traced the pattern of the carpet diamonds with the toe of his too large shoe. From the hallway came the sound of her voice, low and measured, speaking to his aunt, and then to his uncle, and then the silence that followed something she said to his uncle that made the noise stop. He didn't know what was happening, but it had the quality of something that had been a very long time arriving. Amelia Bones stood in the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, and thought about the file she had pulled 3 days ago. 10 years of detections at this address, logged by the improper use of magic office and never acted on. Hair growth incidents, a color change effect, a location shift, a vanishing of a muggle barrier at a zoo in June of this year. Each one recorded, none followed up, accumulating quietly in a drawer as if someone had decided that whatever was happening here was someone else's concern. She had read the Hogwarts letter, the address on the envelope, Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive. She had signed the warrant herself and come herself, which was not standard. She had told herself it was because the case was unusual. The harder truth was that she had known what she would find before she arrived, and she had taken 3 days anyway because she believed in certainty. You did not disrupt a child's life on instinct. You read the files twice. She was sure. She had been sure from the moment she looked at the cot with its single blanket and done the arithmetic. 10 years, this room, the bolt fastened on the outside of the door. Behind her, Vernon Dursley was finding his voice again. She could hear it swelling at her back. She thought about the boy in the sitting room, who had answered every question plainly and without theatrics, and had not once asked what was going to happen next. As if that particular question had been taught out of him. She had done this work for 20 years. She was not easily surprised by what people were capable of. She straightened her jacket. She turned around. 3 men arrived on Privet Drive at noon. Harry saw them coming from the sitting-room window. They appeared at the far end of the road, in the way Amelia Bones had appeared, present where they hadn't been a moment before, and they walked with the unhurried certainty of people who know exactly where they are going. To anyone watching from behind the net curtains of numbers 5, 6, or 7, they might have appeared unremarkable. 3 people in dark coats walking down a suburban street, the kind of people your eyes slide off. Vernon saw them from the front hallway. Harry couldn't see Vernon's face from where he was sitting, but he could hear his uncle's voice change register, the bluster giving way to something less certain, then returning louder than before. Vernon moved toward the front door. One of the 3 men was already there. There was shouting, mostly from Vernon. There were several minutes of it. Harry sat on the brown sofa that was not Dursley furniture, and looked at the carpet and listened. He heard Vernon say something about his rights. He heard Vernon say the word solicitor. He heard the word police mentioned several times in rapid succession, and then he heard Amelia Bones say something low and even in response. And then there was a different kind of sound from the hallway, a brief, physical scuffle, and then quiet. When Amelia came to stand in the sitting-room doorway, she had changed her monocle for a pair of rectangular spectacles, and she was holding a document. "Mr. Dursley," she said. Vernon had been escorted to the hallway behind her, where 2 of the officers flanked him. His face was the color of the beetroot Aunt Petunia grew in pots on the back windowsill. "I am formally charging you, under the jurisdiction of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, with the sustained unlawful confinement of a wizarding minor, systematic deprivation of living standards adequate for a child under ministry protection, and the willful concealment of said minor's identity and origins." "You can't," Vernon said. She continued without pausing. "This charge carries a minimum commitment to Azkaban pending Wizengamot review. You will be transferred to Ministry holding within the hour. Your solicitor does not have standing in wizarding jurisdiction and will not be relevant to the proceedings." "This is harassment," Vernon said. "I know my rights. I'll have you know that This is... You can't just... I am the director of a very significant... Do you have any questions?" she said. He had a very large number of them, delivered at considerable volume and decreasing coherence. At the end of it, one of the officers took Vernon's arm, and Vernon attempted to pull free, and the officer held on, and that was more or less the end of Vernon's questions. Petunia had appeared at the far end of the hallway. She was standing with her arms crossed tight over her chest, and she was watching her husband being escorted toward the front door, and she was not saying anything. When Vernon had been taken out, Amelia walked to where Petunia stood. "Mrs. Dursley," she said, "I have not issued a charge against you." She said it plainly, not as a kindness, but as a fact. "You accepted your nephew when Dumbledore left him on your doorstep. The arrangement was not of your choosing. What followed was not what it should have been. But the department's assessment is that primary criminal culpability lies with your husband, and it is your husband who faces formal proceedings." A pause. "You will be called as a witness before the Wizengamot. I strongly advise you not to leave the country." Petunia's face did not change. It stayed at that thin, pale setting it had arrived at when Amelia Bones walked through the front door, and it did not depart from it. She looked at Harry for one moment. He looked back. She looked away first. Dudley was on the stairs, very large and very uncertain, looking between his mother and the stranger, and the front door his father had just gone out of. Amelia glanced at him. "Your son stays with you," she said. She turned to Harry. "Are you ready to come?" she said. Harry looked around the sitting room. He looked at the mantelpiece with the photographs of Dudley at various ages, large and blonde, and pleased about something in all of them. He looked at the corner of the sofa he'd been sitting on, which was not a corner he was normally permitted to sit on. He thought, briefly and deliberately, about the bolt on the outside of the cupboard door. "Yes," he said. He followed her out of the front door and along the path to the gate. At the gate he stopped once and turned back. The cupboard door under the stairs was ajar from when Amelia had left it open, the bolt hanging loose, the dark inside it visible from here. He looked at it for one moment. Then he turned around and walked through the gate and didn't look back again. He didn't feel anything happen. There was no sound and no sensation. But in that step from the gate to the pavement, in the particular quality of his not turning back a second time, of his feet carrying him away from that house without any part of him trying to stop them, something that had been anchored to it simply came loose. A charm that required him to call it home. He had stopped calling it anything. He would not know this for a long time. They took the tube to central London, which surprised him. He had expected something more unusual, and the tube was only unusual in that Amelia Bones was on it in those dark clothes that were wrong for July. She did not speak much. At a street he didn't recognize, she stopped at a red phone booth between a newsagent and a building covered in scaffolding, and she opened it and stepped inside and dialed 5 digits on the receiver, and the floor went down. Harry stood in the phone booth as the street disappeared around them and said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. He had known for approximately 5 hours that magic existed. The floor going down was just one more thing. The Ministry of Magic was underground, and it was enormous, and that was all Harry understood about it for the first several minutes. The ceilings went up into darkness. The floor was polished stone and vast, covered in golden symbols that caught the amber light, and that Harry found himself stepping carefully around by instinct. Along one wall, fireplaces blazed green and opened every few moments to release people into the atrium, who straightened themselves and moved off with purpose. He walked beside Amelia Bones and looked at things. She signed a register at a long desk and led him down a corridor, and then another. She didn't tell him to keep up. She didn't tell him to stop looking. He looked at everything. She put him in a room with a sofa and a table and a portrait on the wall, a painted countryside, gentle hills, sheep moving slowly across them. And she said someone would bring food and that she would be back before long, and she left. He sat. He looked at the portrait. A painted bird flew across a painted sky in a slow, looping circle. Food came, sandwiches and a glass of something orange that was not orange juice. Pumpkin juice, apparently, and it was quite good. He ate and waited and listened to the indistinct sound of voices through the wall, and somewhere further away in this underground building, Vernon Dursley was being processed. Amelia Bones signed the commitment order at Sundown. Vernon Dursley, emergency remand to Azkaban pending Wizengamot review. She wrote the date. She wrote her name. She put the quill down and sat for a moment in the quiet of her office. She thought about the file she had pulled 3 days ago, the zoo in June, and the 9 entries before it, stretching back a decade, each logged and never followed up. She had read all of them. She had known what she would find. She had not gone sooner. She had read the files, and she had waited until she was certain, and she had not gone sooner. 2 minutes with that. Then she filed it away where she kept things she was not finished thinking about, and reached for the next document. Harry James Potter, age 10. Legal guardian. Parents deceased. Designated secondary guardian. Sirius Orion Black, named as Godfather. Date of assignment, October 1981. Current status of Sirius Orion Black, Azkaban. Committed November 1981. She stopped. She read it again. No trial record. No hearing transcript. Just the commitment order and the date. 2 days after the Potters had died, when corners had been cut and questions had not been asked. She had more immediate concerns. She had a 10-year-old boy in a room down the corridor who needed a placement, a broken blood protection that Dumbledore was going to have substantial feelings about, and a Wizengamot case file to build. She had more immediate concerns. She moved the Sirius Black notation to the left side of her desk. She did not file it away. The room they moved him to had a bed, which was the strangest thing about it. Not the smallest room he'd ever seen. The cupboard under the stairs had that settled, but small enough, and warm, with a table and a lamp and a portrait on the wall where a window might have been. Painted hills, painted sheep moving across them in a slow, patient loop. Harry had been watching them for some time. There was food on the table, more food than he was used to being given at once. Bread and soup that smelled of something rich and substantial, and another glass of pumpkin juice, because apparently that was what the ministry gave you, and it turned out he liked it. He ate the way he always ate when food was available, and no one was watching for the exact amount he took, steadily, methodically, leaving nothing. When the bowl was empty, he sat and looked at the portrait and thought about the bed. It had 2 pillows, a thick quilt. Nobody had told him how many blankets he was permitted to use. He had been sitting on the edge of the mattress for a while now, not quite lying down, because something in him kept expecting to be told he'd gotten something wrong. He was still sitting on the edge of it when Amelia Bones knocked and came in. She sat across from him at the table with her notebook open and a pen that moved in near silence, the way everything about her moved in near silence, contained, purposeful, already certain of where it was going. "There are things I need to tell you," she said. "I'm going to take them in order. If you want to stop and ask me something, stop and ask." He looked at her. "You are a wizard," she said. "Magic is real. What has been happening around you your whole life? The hair that grew back, the wig, the school roof, the snake at the zoo. Those are not accidents or abnormalities. They are what you are." He had known that. He had known it the same way he'd always known the car crash story was wrong, not with evidence, just with the particular certainty of a thing that had always been true underneath everything. He nodded. "Your parents did not die in a car crash." The room was very quiet. The painted sheep moved. Their names were James Potter and Lily Potter. They were both wizards. They were good people. I can tell you that with some certainty they were regarded very highly by the people who knew them. They were murdered 10 years ago, when you were 15 months old. They were protecting you when it happened. They did not leave you. They did not choose to die. They were taken. He didn't say anything. He was looking at a point somewhere past her left shoulder. "That's the most important thing," she said quietly. "Not the car crash. Not what the Dursleys told you. Whatever comes next, hold on to that first." He touched the scar on his forehead without meaning to. His hand just moved, the way it always moved, the same reflex he'd had since he was small enough to not know why he did it. "They said that was from the crash," he said. "No." She looked at him directly. "It's connected to the night your parents died. It's a longer answer, and it's late, and I'm going to give you all of it. Just not tonight. Tonight, I wanted you to know who they were, their names, that they existed, that they loved you." She paused. "I'm not going to tell you it was a car crash." He lowered his hand. "Okay," he said. "All right." She looked at him for a moment, with the same careful measurement she had been giving him all day, as though she was checking that the weight of what she was saying had somewhere to land. "I've sent for someone who knew your parents," she said. "He'll be here before long. He can tell you about them better than I can. I didn't know them personally." He did. She said good night at 9:30 and left, and Harry lay back on the quilt without getting under it, and watched the painted sheep and waited. He thought about James and Lily Potter. He tried out the names the way you tried out a thing you'd never been given before. His parents had names. His parents had been wizards. His parents had been murdered protecting him. He had always known the car crash story was wrong. Amelia Bones walked down the corridor to her office, wrote 3 letters, and dispatched the most urgent of them to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, addressed not to the headmaster, not yet, but to the gamekeeper, one R. Hagrid, the name that appeared in the earliest records, the man who had carried the boy from the ruins of Godric's Hollow to a doorstep in Surrey on a motorbike borrowed from Sirius Black. She had her reasons for that ordering. Hagrid arrived at 11, which was faster than she'd expected. Harry heard him before he saw him. Footsteps in the corridor with a different quality from other footsteps, a weight and frequency that the building hadn't produced yet, and then a knock on the door that was careful in the way of someone very large, trying to be careful and finding it a challenge. The door opened, and Harry sat up and went still. The man in the doorway was enormous. He was the kind of enormous that rearranged your sense of what the word meant. Broader than the frame wanted, taller than the ceiling comfortably accommodated, with a long, wild tangle of dark hair and a beard that occupied the lower half of his face and a good portion of his chest. His eyes were dark, visible only as points of light through all that hair, and they were already doing something before he'd properly entered the room. He stood there and looked at Harry and didn't say anything for a moment. "Blimey," he said, in a voice like stones shifting. And then he didn't say anything else, because he was very clearly attempting not to cry, and not managing it especially well. "You look just like your dad," he said, when he'd gathered himself enough to continue. "The faces, it's James, it's exactly, except the eyes." His voice went unsteady. "Your mum's eyes. I'd know 'em anywhere." Harry looked at him. "Who are you?" "Hagrid. Rubeus Hagrid." He sat down heavily on the chair beside the bed, which creaked with what seemed like genuine structural concern. "We've met. Sort of. You wouldn't remember it. You were about this big." He held out one hand at a height that implied a fairly small loaf of bread. "I was the one who brought you, when it happened. Took you from your mum and dad's house to that doorstep. Put you there myself." He stopped. Something moved through his face that didn't fully resolve. "You're all right," he said, quieter. "You're safe." Harry looked at him. "You knew my parents?" "Knew 'em." Hagrid produced a handkerchief from somewhere inside his coat. It was enormous, as everything about him was enormous, and applied it briefly. Yeah, I did." And then he talked. Not about everything. Not about the prophecy. Not about who had done it. not about the details of the night it happened. Just James and Lily Potter, who they had been when they were alive. Before everything. Hagrid had known them since they were students at Hogwarts, and he talked about them the way you talked about people whose loss hadn't gone anywhere despite the years. James Potter had been tall and quick and laughing, the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately had opinions about everything in it, and was usually right and usually knew he was right, and was somehow charming about it rather than insufferable. He had been funny in the particular way that made the people around him funnier, just for being near him. He'd been brave without making a production of it. He'd been a very good Quidditch player, Hagrid said, really very good, and had been proud of it in an endearing way. Lily Potter had been small and fierce and brilliant at magic. Muggle parents, which had surprised people at Hogwarts, because she was more powerful than most who'd grown up in wizarding families, and more interested in magic than almost anyone Hagrid had ever known. She'd been kind in a precise way, the kind that noticed what people actually needed, rather than what was easier to give. She had, Hagrid said, the kindest eyes he had ever seen in his life. He stopped. He applied the handkerchief. "They died protecting you," he said. "Both of them. That's the truth of it. They didn't leave. They didn't give up. They were taken. But they loved you more than—" "There aren't words for it, Harry. There just aren't." Harry held that for a moment. When Hagrid pushed himself to his feet, "You should sleep. It's late, I shouldn't have. You should rest." Harry said, "Why didn't anyone come sooner?" Hagrid stopped. He stood with one hand on the door and his back to the room, and his shoulders rose once, very slowly, and fell. "I don't know," he said. "I've been asking myself there since the message came." He went out quietly, which was a difficult thing for a man of his dimensions, and managed it. Harry lay back on the 2 pillows and looked at the ceiling, an ordinary ceiling, plaster and nothing more, and didn't ask himself what came next, because there would be a long time for that. He closed his eyes. He came without announcement and without apology, which were both things Amelia had expected. She was at the far end of the corridor when the lift doors opened and he stepped out, and for a moment she stood where she was and looked at him. She had met Albus Dumbledore twice before, briefly at Wizengamot proceedings, and he had been exactly what he was now. Very tall, very thin, with silver hair and a silver beard that were both long enough to tuck into his belt and half-moon spectacles, riding low on a nose that had been broken at some point and healed crookedly. He was, according to the records she'd consulted, approximately 110 years old. He didn't look it, which she attributed either to the effects of magical longevity or to the particular preservation that seemed to attend being the most powerful wizard currently alive. His eyes today were not twinkling. They were very blue and very still, and he walked with his hands clasped behind his back and the controlled expression of someone who is expending continuous effort to maintain it. "Madam Bones," he said. "Professor Dumbledore." She stepped aside. "I've been expecting you." "I imagined so." They walked the corridor side by side without speaking, and Amelia thought about what she had set on her desk, and what she would let him say first and what she would not, and Dumbledore walked at her pace and looked at the middle distance and did not explain himself. Her office, 2 chairs across a desk. She sat, and he sat. "The bond of blood," she said. He looked at her over his spectacles. "You know about it. I know what the trace logs told me when I went back through 10 years of notifications from Privet Drive and began asking why none of them had ever been reviewed." She had a folder on the desk in front of her, and she did not open it. "I know what it means that the charm has now been broken. I would like to hear the rest from you." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, there is a curse. There was a curse, placed on Harry by the Dark Lord on the night of October 31st, 1981. A killing curse, cast with full intent, that struck a 15-month-old child and did not kill him. I am aware. It did not kill him because his mother chose to die for him. Lily Potter stood between her child and that curse and refused to step aside, and the love she put into that act created a protection. Old magic, older than most of what we practice, that reflected the curse back upon its caster. She gave her life for his, willingly and with full knowledge, and that act was its own kind of power." He paused. "I shaped that protection into something sustainable. I extended it. While Harry could call home the place where his mother's blood dwells, while Petunia Dursley's house was home, he could not be touched or harmed by Voldemort. Those were the terms. The charm required blood, and Lily's blood runs in her sister's veins. That was the anchor. That was the only anchor available." Amelia listened. "It was the strongest protection I could give him," he said. 4 Privet Drive was the only place in the world where the terms of the charm could be met. He was safer there than anywhere else I could have placed him. "I understand the charm," she said. She reached into the folder and set a document on the desk between them. A single sheet, cream-colored, Hogwarts crest at the top, one line of address. Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. She set it down and left her hand beside it, and let him look. "When did you last visit Privet Drive, Professor?" He looked at the letter. 1981. "And to your knowledge, when did the Department of Magical Law Enforcement last review the trace notification logs from this address?" A pause. "I would not have direct knowledge of that." "Never. 10 years of trace detections from this address, 11 incidents logged, none reviewed, none cross-referenced, with child welfare records or placement oversight. The first detection was logged in January 1982. Harry was 2 years old." She gave him a moment with that. "And who, in your understanding, was responsible for reviewing those records and confirming the welfare of the child you placed there?" The office was quiet. "I had asked Arabella Figg to keep watch," he said. "She is a squib, a Muggle-adjacent resident of Little Whinging. She reported to me regularly. Arabella Figg had no power to intervene. She could observe. She could report that nothing catastrophic had occurred. That is not oversight." Amelia held his gaze. "The letter you are looking at was produced by the Hogwarts enrollment system. That system records the residential address of the student. Whatever room that system records as the address is the room the student inhabits. It recorded a cupboard under the stairs. That notation has been sitting in ministry enrollment records for the better part of a decade, and no one read it." He looked at the letter for a long moment. She had prepared to argue the protection with him. She had prepared for him to cite the necessity of the charm, the alternatives that did not exist, the weight of the choice. She had her counter-arguments arranged. He did not make her use them. He sat with the document between them and did not argue. She had made the choice that no one else had made. He had made a choice that had been correct on one axis and had failed entirely on another. That was the gap between them, and the letter address was the proof of it. "Safe from Voldemort," she said quietly, "and safe are not the same thing." His hands were folded on the desk in front of him. He did not move them. "No," he said. "They are not." "The charm is broken," she said. "Harry walked through the gate yesterday, and he is no longer protected by it. You are aware of what follows from that." I am aware." He was quiet for a moment. "Voldemort is not destroyed. He persists, in a weakened form, a wraith, unable to act independently or maintain a physical form of his own. But he persists, and the protection the charm provided has ceased. A new arrangement must be made." She waited. He did not offer one. "You don't have something in place," she said. It was not quite a question. He met her eyes and said nothing. After a moment, she nodded and wrote something in her notebook and did not comment further, because she had 10 years of evidence that commentary accomplished less than documentation. In the room adjacent to the office, Harry sat in the chair nearest the door with his tea going cold in his hands, listening to the sound of voices through the wall. They were just voices, too low and careful to resolve into words. He could hear the shape of a conversation, one voice steady and unhurried, the other quieter, more clipped. He could hear that they were being careful about something. Hagrid was across the room on the sofa. He'd been there for 20 minutes, and he'd grown progressively stiller during that time, the way large things sometimes went still when they were paying attention to something they didn't want to show. He was looking at the middle of the wall, when the unhurried voice on the other side made a longer statement, the kind with a specific weight in its cadence, the kind that ended in silence rather than a reply. Something moved in Hagrid's face. "Who is it?" Harry said. "Headmaster." Hagrid's voice was careful. It'll be fine. Don't worry yourself." Harry looked at the wall and did not ask more. When Amelia opened the door between the rooms, the man who came through it stood still for a moment and looked at Harry. He was very old and very tall and very thin, with long silver hair and a long silver beard, and spectacles on a nose that had healed crooked and blue eyes that were looking at Harry the way Amelia Bones looked at things, as though looking were a kind of deliberate work. Harry had the sudden impression of being measured for something he didn't understand yet. "Hello," Harry said. Dumbledore said, "You have your mother's eyes." He said it quietly, and without theatrical weight, and with the particular tone of someone who has known a fact for a long time, and is feeling it differently today than he expected to. He looked at Harry for another moment. Harry, who looked back steadily and didn't speak because he didn't yet know what to say, and didn't yet know what to ask, and was still learning the landscape of what there was to know. "I am glad," Dumbledore said, "that you are safe." Then he left. Harry watched the door close behind him. He looked at Hagrid. Hagrid was looking at the door. His expression was doing several things that didn't quite resolve, and after a moment he picked up his tea, which was also cold by now, and drank it anyway. "Who was that?" Harry said. "Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore. He's the headmaster of Hogwarts, the school you'll be going to, come September." Hagrid set the cup down. "He knew your mum, and your dad." Harry looked at the door. He looked at me like he recognized me. "Yeah," said Hagrid quietly. He would. 2 weeks is long enough to know a thing and still not believe it. Harry knew he was a wizard. He had been told. He had been told about James and Lily Potter, about the night they died, about the castle in Scotland, where he would go in September to learn to do deliberately what he had been doing by accident for most of his life. He knew all of it. The knowing sat in him, the way something large sits in a small space. Present, undeniable, not yet made room for. Hagrid came for him on a Tuesday in late July, and they took the underground from the Ministry District into central London, because apparently that was how you got to Diagon Alley, which Harry found both practical and slightly anticlimactic. The Leaky Cauldron was on Charing Cross Road, between what looked like a record shop and a bookshop. It was dark inside, and smelled of old wood and something that might have been pumpkin, and every person in it looked up when Hagrid came through the door and then looked at Harry. He didn't know why. Not yet. Hagrid tapped a specific sequence on the brick wall in the back courtyard. 3 up, 2 across, and the wall rippled and folded itself open, and the street was there. Harry stood in the opening and looked. He had not known this was possible, and he had known for 2 weeks that almost anything was possible. And Diagon Alley was still miraculous. It went further than it should have. The buildings on both sides leaned inward at their upper floors as if they had been having a slow conversation for centuries and had gotten closer over the years. The shop windows held things that moved, things that glittered, things that did not behave like objects were supposed to behave. People in robes and people in muggle clothes, a cart piled with brass telescopes, the smell of something burning sweetly, and something else being brewed, and somewhere, very faintly, a cat. "Right," said Hagrid, looking at him with the expression he had developed for moments like this. Complicated satisfaction, slightly wet around the eyes. "First, Gringotts." The bank was white marble, and large in the deliberate way of buildings that want you to understand something about the institution they contain. The goblins at the counters had long fingers, and the professional manner of people who had been managing other people's money for centuries, and had developed no particular warmth about it. Hagrid presented a document, spoke briefly with a goblin, and Harry was led to a cart and then down, very fast, into the rock. Vault 687. The door opened with a sound like something enormous exhaling. Gold. Stacked and piled and sitting in the torchlight, exactly as money looked in stories. Except this was real, and it was his, and it was James Potter's money. Money that had existed in the world while he was sleeping in a cupboard under the stairs, and neither he nor it had known about the other. He picked up one of the gold coins. He turned it over. He did not look up for a while. He had cooked breakfast for 10 years in a house where every object belonged to someone else. This was his. All of it was his. James Potter's money, passed down, waiting. He had not existed to claim it, and it had waited anyway. They did the school shopping methodically. Robes, a cauldron, brass scales, a telescope, the required books. At each shop he paid with the gold coins in his bag, which still felt strange. The particular strangeness of owning something, of paying without asking permission. He did it carefully and quietly, and each time the witch or wizard behind the counter looked up and looked at him, and then looked away with an expression he couldn't read. By the 3rd shop he said to Hagrid, "Why do people keep looking at me?" Hagrid went quiet. He looked at his boots for a moment. "You're known," he said, "in the wizarding world. People have known about you since the night your parents died. What happened that night, the fact that you survived, people heard. People celebrated." He paused. "They named their children after you. There was a baby in the village near Hogwarts, named Harry, for you. You were 1 year old and people were drinking your health in the streets." He looked up. "You didn't know any of that?" Harry thought about it. "No," he said. "I didn't know." He looked at the next shop window and did not say more because there was nothing adequate. Ollivander's was narrow and dusty, with boxes stacked floor to ceiling and a silence that felt like held breath. Mr. Ollivander appeared from between 2 shelves and looked at Harry with pale, wide, silvery eyes that caught the wand light oddly, as if they were seeing past the surface of things. "Mr. Potter," he said, very quietly, "I thought I'd be seeing you soon." He asked to look at Harry's scar. He said nothing about what he saw, only looked for a moment, and nodded once. His tape measure moved on its own. He began bringing out boxes. Most wands did nothing. One cracked the edge of a shelf. One set the tip of Ollivander's sleeve smoking, and was put back immediately. Then the 11th wand, Or perhaps the 12th? Holly, phoenix feather, 11 inches, supple. Harry gave it a wave, and a shower of sparks came out of the end. Gold and red, bright and purposeless, like something celebrating. Ollivander smiled, and the smile was also thinking. "Curious," he said. "Very curious." He took the wand briefly, turned it, gave it back. "There is one other wand in existence that shares a core with that one. Both cores came from the same phoenix, a very particular bird." He looked at Harry with those pale, steady eyes. "I wonder what it will mean, your having this one." "What does it mean?" Harry said. "I don't know yet." He said it with the tone of someone who did know and had decided not to say. "The other wand is 13.5 inches. I sold it many years ago." Harry filed this away. He was becoming good at filing things away. The owl was Hagrid's idea. They passed Aelop's Owl Emporium, and Hagrid stopped and looked at the window, and then looked at Harry and went in. She was snowy white and very still on a perch near the back, looking at the shop with the composed attention of something that has assessed its surroundings and decided they would do for now. When Harry approached, she blinked at him once. He held out his wrist and she stepped onto it without hesitation. "She's beautiful," Harry said. "She's yours," Hagrid said. "Happy birthday. A bit late, but there it is." He had never been given a gift. He had known this in the abstract for most of his life. But he knew it concretely now. Holding the cage on the way back through the alley, the owl looking steadily back at him through the bars. He named her Hedwig, because he had read the name in one of his new history of magic books, and it had seemed like a name for something dignified. They ate at the Leaky Cauldron at the end of the day. Hagrid ordered 2 butterbeers and a plate of things, and Harry ate steadily and without comment until he was actually full, which was a state he did not often arrive at and did not always recognize when it happened. He sat back in his chair and looked at his empty plate. "What happens next?" he said. "September 1st, said Hagrid. "Hogwarts Express from King's Cross, platform 9 3/4. I'll write it all down for you. Big letters." He drank his butterbeer. "And we'll sort the rest as we go." Harry looked at Hedwig in her cage beside him. She was working through a piece of bread crust with the focused composure of something that had decided to take what was offered. He thought that was probably the right approach. Hagrid's note had been written in letters 2 inches tall, careful and deliberate and slightly wavery in the way of someone who was concentrating very hard. Platform 9, 3 or 4. Lean into the barrier between 9 and 10. Do not stop. Harry had read it 4 times on the train from the Ministry District, and he had it more or less committed. He went at a walk, not a run, because running felt like admitting doubt. The barrier came up and he went through it, and then he was on the other side, and the Hogwarts Express was there. He stopped. It was red. It was very red and enormous, sitting in a cloud of steam that turned the morning light silver, and the platform behind him was full of families with trunks and owls and noise. He stood with his own trunk beside him and Hedwig in her cage, and looked at the train for a moment. Just looked. The way you looked at something when you'd been told it existed and were now confronted with the fact of it. He found a compartment 3 carriages back and put his trunk up and sat down. The red-haired boy appeared a few minutes later, knocked once on the glass, and opened the door. He was tall for 11 and freckled and had the look of someone who had been doing something to himself in the last 30 seconds. And what he'd been doing was stopping himself from staring. He was only partially successful. "Everywhere else is full," he said. "All right if I—" "Yes," Harry said. He came in and lifted his trunk up and sat down, glanced at Harry, looked at the window, glanced again. "Ron Weasley," he said. "Harry Potter." Something moved in Ron's face, a visible effort, the kind that had a history behind it. "Yeah," he said. "My brothers. They mentioned. When it came out that you'd been at the ministry in July, they were on about it for about 2 weeks. They argued about it, actually. Which one of them was going to see you first?" He paused. "It was none of them, in case you were wondering." "I wasn't," Harry said. "But noted." Ron grinned. He had a good grin, quick and slightly crooked. He pulled a package from his bag and unwrapped it. "I've got corned beef. My mum always puts in corned beef. Want half?" Harry considered the sandwich. "Yes," he said. "Thanks." The girl arrived an hour outside London, with a round-faced boy trailing behind her. She knocked and opened the door without waiting for a response. "Has anyone seen a toad? This boy's lost his toad." She had a rather carrying voice and bushy brown hair, and the manner of someone who was quite confident she would be useful to whatever situation she'd been presented with. "I'm Hermione Granger," she added. "What are your names?" They gave their names. She looked at Harry for precisely as long as it took to locate the relevant information in her memory. And then she looked at the round-faced boy, who had just noticed that something was under Harry's seat, and the toad was retrieved from under the seat and returned to its owner, who held it with the careful gratitude of someone who had expected to be disappointed and hadn't been. "Neville," he said. "Neville Longbottom." He sat down in the only remaining corner and made himself small in the expert way of someone who had been practicing. Hermione had already read all of the textbooks. She went through them methodically, which subjects seemed most difficult, which teachers she'd heard the most about, where they each thought they'd be sorted. Ron said Gryffindor, because everyone in his family was Gryffindor. Neville said he didn't know, and that the sorting probably made a mistake sometimes. Harry said Gryffindor, because his father had been Gryffindor, which he only realized was a strange thing to say when all 3 of them looked at him. "He was," Harry said. "James Potter." "He was in Gryffindor." A short silence. "Yeah," Ron said carefully. "He was?" The ceiling of the Great Hall was not a ceiling. Harry had been told about it. Hagrid had mentioned it somewhere in one of their conversations over the summer. But being told was not the same as looking up at the September night sky directly overhead, clouds moving through it in real time, the hall lit from below by hundreds of floating candles, and from above by nothing at all. He stood in the crush of first years moving toward the front, and looked up for a moment longer than he probably should have. He also knew, in a way Canon could not have prepared him for, that some of the faces looking at him from the 4 long tables had known his parents. His father had sat at one of those tables. His mother had sat at one of them. Some of the adults at the staff table had taught them. The Sorting Hat song covered the whole of this in rhyming verse. Harry absorbed the information and the rhyme scheme and tried to sort out what he felt, which was something between anticipation and the very specific feeling of standing in a room where your history predates you. When his name was called, the hall went quiet. Not the polite quiet that had followed the other names. A different quality of quiet, the kind that had weight in it. He sat down on the stool, and the hat came down over his eyes, and everything went dark. Said the hat inside his head. Its voice was like old, dry paper. "You are not what I expected. You know more than they usually do at this age. You have had to know more." Harry didn't say anything. "Gryffindor," the hat said. It said it with the certainty of something that had made up its mind long before the conversation started, but it had taken longer, nearly a full minute, to say it. When it came off his head, the hall was clapping, and it was loud, and he walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down, and found that his hands were not quite steady. He knew what the word meant. Gryffindor. His father had been Gryffindor. He thought, all right. All right then. It was during the welcome feast that he found the eyes looking at him from the staff table and traced them to their source. A man with greasy black hair and a large hooked nose and black eyes that were fixed on Harry with an expression Harry couldn't name. When Harry met his gaze, the man held it for exactly 2 seconds and then looked at his plate. Across the hall, Severus Snape looked at his food and did not look up again. He had been expecting this for 10 years, and he had not been adequately prepared. The boy was James Potter's face, the same jaw, the same build in miniature, the same dark, untidy hair. And Snape had known to brace for that. He had not adequately reckoned with the eyes. Green. Lily's eyes in James Potter's face. He had spent a decade not thinking about that, and now he could not stop thinking about it. And he was going to eat his food and not look at the Gryffindor table. He was the potions master, according to Ron. Harry filed that away with everything else he could not yet read. He filed it away. Dumbledore rose at the end of the feast and gave a welcome speech. Warmth, announcements, the usual architecture of beginnings. And then, almost as an aside, he mentioned that the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side of the castle was out of bounds to all students. Those who did not wish to die most painfully were advised to remember this. He said it pleasantly. He sat back down. Harry looked at the third-floor corridor warning. He looked at the way it had been delivered, the pleasant tone, the casual placement, the nothing-to-see-here pacing, and he noted it. He had spent 2 months learning that the things adults said most casually were sometimes the things worth listening to most carefully. He looked at his plate, and then at the enchanted ceiling, and then at the Gryffindor table around him, which was now his table. He thought, this is the beginning of the part where he gets to find out what the rest of his life is. Magic, it turned out, was something Harry was good at. This surprised him less than it probably should have. He had been doing it accidentally for 10 years. The deliberate version felt like finally being allowed to use the right hand instead of the left. Transfiguration rewarded a certain precise attention to what you were asking an object to do, and he had spent a decade learning how to be precise about things that could not be argued with. Charms required a kind of controlled intent, and he had a great deal of practice at controlling himself. He wasn't the best in his year. Hermione held that position with the particular thoroughness of someone who had been preparing for it. But he was good, and sometimes he was more than good, and the feeling of being good at something he was actually allowed to be good at was one he found he had to process slowly. He was 11 years old, and 2 months out of a cupboard, and in some part of himself still waiting for the moment when someone came to take it all away. On the whole, he found Hogwarts easier to believe in when he was too busy to think about it. Potions was on Thursday mornings in the dungeons. Professor Snape arrived with the silence that preceded him everywhere, and stood at the front of the room and looked at them. His eyes moved to Harry once, and then moved away, and then he began to speak, and his voice was low and precise, and the room went very quiet around it. Potter. He let the name sit for a moment. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The room looked at Harry. Harry did not know the answer. He was not going to pretend he did. He also knew, because he had spent 2 months learning things he had not known before, that his mother had been brilliant at potions, had been the kind of student teachers remembered. He knew that Snape had known her. I don't know, he said, but my mother did. The silence had a different quality than the silence before. Snape's face did something Harry couldn't quite catch. It happened, and then it stopped happening, the way a door opens and closes fast enough that you only register the light. He looked at Harry for exactly 1 second. "Asphodel and Wormwood," he said. "Produce the draught of living death." He turned away. Which is not, in fact, the lesson. Harry watched him for the rest of the class. He filed away the thing he'd seen. He did not know yet what it meant. He knew it was not nothing. The dormitory that Harry shared with Ron and Neville and 2 other boys had a window that looked out on the lake, and at night the light from it moved across the ceiling in slow patterns. Harry had slept well, better than he expected, better than he deserved, maybe, in the particular way of an exhausted body that had finally been given a mattress and told it was allowed. Neville was in the next bed. He wasn't always fine at night. Harry could hear it, not loudly, not dramatically, the way people described crying in books, just the sound of someone being awake at a time when sleep would have been better, and sometimes a movement, and then quiet. He never said anything. Neither did Neville. There was no conversation to have about it, no language for the specific thing they were both carrying, which was a knowledge that 11-year-olds were not supposed to have, and which neither of them had asked for, and which sat in the middle of everything anyway. It was not friendship, exactly. It was something quieter and more durable than that. It was the understanding of 2 people who had already learned what the word loss meant before anyone had thought to teach them. The troll happened on Halloween. Someone let it into the castle during the feast. It got into the girls' bathroom, which was where Hermione was, because she had heard that Ron had said she had no friends and had gone to cry about it, which Ron knew and which was producing a very specific expression on Ron's face for the duration of the feast. Harry and Ron went to find her after Voldemort's host gave his warning about the troll, and all the prefects were taking the students back to the dormitories, and the 3 of them locked it in the bathroom and came out and were found by McGonagall and given 5 points each and a very thorough telling off. And then the telling off was over, and the 3 of them looked at each other. Ron said, "Are you all right?" Hermione said, "I'm fine, thank you." Neither of those things was entirely true. All 3 of them knew it. They went back to Gryffindor Tower together, and after that they went most places together, which was, Harry thought, the natural consequence of surviving a troll with someone. The letter arrived on a Saturday in October with the Morning Post. It was addressed in careful, slightly hesitant handwriting, not Hagrid's large lettered writing, not the official ministry script he'd seen over the summer. Different. The parchment was slightly worn, the way of something written by someone who had thought about what they were going to say before they said it. The letter was short. The writer's name was Remus Lupin, and he had known Harry's father. He had been glad to hear. He did not say through what channels that Harry was safe and at Hogwarts. He said he had some photographs, if Harry would like them, taken during James and Lily's time at school. He would understand entirely if Harry preferred not to correspond. He did not sign with a title or affiliation. He signed with his name. Harry read the letter twice. He thought about photographs of his parents at Hogwarts, at the age he was now, or close to it. And the thought produced something in him that he was still getting accustomed to, which was a kind of grief that didn't feel like grief at the time you were feeling it, but felt like something else, like a want with no object and nowhere to put it. He wrote back and said yes, he would like the photographs very much. Hagrid's hut was on the grounds near the Forbidden Forest, which meant it was technically a short walk from the castle, and in practice, a different world. The hut smelled of wood smoke, and something large and animal, and the something large and animal turned out to be a boarhound named Fang, who was very pleased about visitors and expressed this at considerable volume. Hagrid had made rock cakes. They were, Harry had learned over the summer, Hagrid's signature effort, and they had the structural integrity of actual rock. He ate them without complaint and drank his tea. "I wanted to ask about my mum," Harry said. He had asked about his father several times over the summer. He had gotten good stories about James Potter, the laugh, the Quidditch, the particular quality of his courage. But he found, sitting in Hagrid's hut with Fang, leaning against his leg, and the autumn morning coming in through the small window, that he had not asked about Lily. Not directly. Not like this. Hagrid was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his enormous mug, and he took a drink, and he set it down. He cried into his tea. Not loudly. He just sat there with his face doing the thing it did when the grief was too large for him to hold it all in, and he wiped it with the back of his hand, and after a moment, he began to talk. He talked about Lily Potter the way he had talked about James on those summer evenings, with the precise and total love of someone who had known a person and lost them and not gotten over it and had no intention of getting over it. He talked about her until Harry knew something more real about who she had been than anything the records or research could have given him. Fang's head was heavy on his knee. Outside, the lake sat still in the grey light. Harry sat and listened, and let Hagrid talk. November arrived at the ministry with a particular kind of grey. Amelia Bones had been in her office since 7:30, working through the administrative residue of the summer's case. The custody matter itself was settled. Vernon Dursley's Wizengamot proceedings had concluded in October, the formal charge upheld, Azkaban term confirmed, but the guardianship question had not resolved itself with equal tidiness. Harry Potter remained a minor with no designated legal guardian, placed temporarily in ministry accommodation, while the Wizengamot worked through the relevant statutes. He was, as Amelia understood it, making friends at Hogwarts and writing letters to someone named Lupin. This was encouraging on both counts. She had other matters to attend to. The notation had been on the left side of her desk since August. Sirius Orion Black, named as godfather, October 1981. Current status, Azkaban, committed November 1981. No trial record. She had moved it to the left side of her desk because she had told herself she would come back to it. She came back to it now. She pulled the file. It was thinner than it should have been. An arrest report, dated 2nd of November 1981, 2 days after the Potters died, 2 days after Voldemort's fall, in the middle of the chaos that had followed the Dark Lord's sudden absence. A commitment order signed by her predecessor as head of DMLE. A single statement, 3 paragraphs, attesting to Sirius Black's guilt in the deaths of 1 Peter Pettigrew and 12 muggles in a London street. Witnesses named. Evidence summarized. The scene was consistent with Black's guilt. A finger was recovered. Black was apprehended at the scene and offered no defense. That was it. No hearing transcript, no formal charge sheet, no record of a legal representative present, no ministry court docket for trial scheduling, no trial. She looked for the trial record twice. She turned the file over. She looked through it again. Sirius Orion Black had been in Azkaban for 10 years, and he had never had a trial. Not a rushed trial. Not an improperly conducted trial. No trial at all. He had been arrested in November 1981 and committed to Azkaban on the authority of her predecessor's signature. And then, apparently, the question had been considered closed because the world had been celebrating and no one had asked. He had not asked either. He had apparently just gone quiet. She held the file for a moment. Then she put it in her briefcase and went down the corridor to the minister's office. Cornelius Fudge received her from behind a large desk, with the expression of a man who had hoped the morning would not contain this. He was wearing a slightly nervous smile and turning his lime-green bowler over and over in his hands, which was something he did when he had already decided what he was going to say, and was preparing to say it warmly. "Madam Bones," he said, "always a pleasure. What can I do for you?" She told him about the file. He listened with the patient attention of someone who is not listening, and when she had finished he said, "Well, yes. Sirius Black. Terrible business. You know whose right hand, as everyone knew at the time. The evidence was quite overwhelming." "What evidence?" she said. A pause. "Well, the scene. There were witnesses." "To which crime?" she said. "The 12 Muggles and Pettigrew were on a public street in the middle of the day. There were Muggle witnesses to the aftermath. There were no wizarding witnesses to the act. Sirius Black was at the scene when Aurors arrived. That is the extent of the documentation." Fudge was still smiling, but the smile had gone slightly fixed. "Amelia," the man laughed. "When they arrested him, he laughed. The Aurors all said, 'He is entitled to a trial,' she said. 'He was entitled to one in 1981, and he did not receive one. I want to know who made that decision and under what authority.'" Fudge picked up a quill from his desk and set it down again. "I really think," he said, "that we need to be careful about opening doors that the Wizengamot has very much moved past. The mood at the time was extremely. The public feeling about Black specifically was. The public feeling," she said, "is not a legal standard." He said that he would look into it. She said that she would be sending him a formal memo. He said that would be fine. He was still holding his smile, and it had the particular quality of something under considerable structural stress. She went back to her office, wrote the memo, and added the Sirius Black file to a drawer she had labeled for things that were not finished. At Hogwarts, on the 3rd floor, there was a door that shouldn't have been easy to open. It was Harry's fault, in the sense that it was his wand work that accidentally performed a simple unlocking charm on a door he had been trying to walk past quickly, while he was also discussing with Ron the precise question of whether you could use a switching spell to get out of a potions essay. The door opened. He opened it. He went through it. The room behind it was dark and large and smelled enormously of dog. Harry had time to register this, and then to register the reason for it, and then all 3 of them were back through the door and running, which was objectively the correct response to an enormous 3-headed dog that had been sleeping and was now very much not sleeping. They made it to the end of the corridor before Ron said, rather breathlessly, "Did that have 3? "Yes," Harry and Hermione said together, "and it was standing on a trap door," Hermione said. "I saw." They stood in the stairwell for a moment, listening for enormous dog footsteps, and not hearing any. Harry was breathing harder than the sprint entirely accounted for. "Someone put that there," he said, "on purpose, under the thing Dumbledore warned about." "Obviously," Hermione said, who had also been thinking. "He went to Hagrid's hut on Saturday. Fang greeted him at the door with the usual force and enthusiasm, and Hagrid poured tea and listened while Harry described the dog, carefully, leaving out the door, not mentioning that he had done the unlocking. And Hagrid's face went through a visible sequence of emotions that included recognition and self-consciousness, and ended at caution. "Now, thar's Hogwarts business," Hagrid said, which was more confirming than it was deflecting. "Between Dumbledore and the teachers, Privet." "Is it guarding something?" Harry said. Hagrid wrapped his large hands around his mug. "Well, yes, but it's not." He stopped. "It's between Dumbledore and Nicholas Flar." He shut his mouth with an audible click. "Nicholas who?" Harry said. No one, said Hagrid. Don't ask me. It's not my place. Forget I said anything. Harry went back to the castle and found Ron and Hermione in the library. Nicholas, Ron said, and shrugged. Could be loads of people. It won't be, Hermione said. She was already moving along the shelves with the focused efficiency of someone who had pre-filed a great deal of information and knew where it was. She was back in 11 minutes, with a thick reference volume open to a page she had already found. She set it on the table and put her finger on the entry. Harry read it. Nicholas Flamel. French alchemist. Ancient. Ancient enough that the dates attached to his name felt impossible, but were documented. He had created a stone that could turn any metal to gold and produce an elixir of life that would make the drinker immortal. The stone had not been destroyed. It was the only one known to exist. The three of them looked at the page. Dumbledore, Harry said, has it hidden under a 3-headed dog at Hogwarts. That is, Hermione said carefully, what the evidence suggests. Someone's after it, Ron said. That's what the 3rd-floor corridor is. Harry thought about the warning, delivered pleasantly at the welcome feast, by a man who knew exactly what he was telling them not to look for. He thought, of course it is. Most of the students left on the 20th of December, in a long, cheerful migration of trunks and owls and last-minute arguments about who had borrowed whose set of exploding snap cards. Harry stayed. He had nowhere else to go. The ministry accommodation was technically still available to him, but it was a room with a portrait and a bed, and no particular claim on him. And Hogwarts was, by some standard he was only beginning to understand, more his than that. Ron stayed too, by what he described as choice, and what Harry suspected was a form of companionship that didn't require naming. The castle went quiet in the way of a large thing relieved of noise, and Harry found he liked it. He found the mirror on the 23rd in a disused classroom at the end of a corridor he had followed by accident and stayed in by curiosity. It was ornate and very tall, taller than the door it must have come through, which meant someone had moved it with some effort or with magic or both. Gold-framed, with an inscription carved across the top in letters that ran backward and needed a moment to resolve into Erased stra eru oit ube kafru oit on vosi. He stood in front of it. He saw his parents. He knew their faces. He had known them since October, when Lupin's photographs had arrived in an envelope with careful handwriting. James and Lily at Hogwarts, young and alive and not yet knowing what was coming. He had looked at those photographs until he could have described every detail, until he knew the particular way his father stood and the way his mother tilted her head slightly when she was listening. The mirror showed them standing beside him, alive. His mother's hand was on his shoulder. His father was smiling in the way he smiled in the photographs, with his whole face. In canon, this would have been yearning for the unknown. In Harry's version of it, it was grief for the specific. He knew exactly what he was looking at. He knew exactly what he could not have. He stood there for a long time, and did not move, and did not cry, because he had learned over these months that grief was not always something that looked like grief from the outside. He came back the next night and the night after that. On the 4th night, someone else was in the classroom. "You've been coming here," said Dumbledore from the shadows beside the door. He was not accusatory. He was. Harry had learned to read him a little over these months, simply noting a fact with the mild attention of someone who had been aware of it for some time. "Yes," Harry said. "Then I imagine you know what it shows." He came to stand beside Harry and looked into the glass. The mirror of Erist. It shows the viewer the deepest and most desperate desire of their heart. Not reality, but longing. Men have wasted away in front of it, unable to choose the living world over the reflected one. Harry looked at his parents' faces in the glass. "I know they're not real," he said. "I know you do," Dumbledore said quietly. "You're not the kind of person who forgets that." He looked at Harry for a moment. But knowing and not returning are different things. Harry looked at the mirror for a moment longer. Then he looked at the wall beside it. "What do you see?" he said. "When you look in it." A pause. Dumbledore's expression settled into something that was almost fond and almost sad and also entirely managed. "Socks," he said. "One can never have enough socks." He said it with the ease of a man who has practiced saying it. Harry nodded, as though he believed it. It was not the first time Dumbledore had told him something that occupied the shape of an answer without quite being one, and Harry had gotten better at recognizing the shape. He did not go back to the mirror after that. Amelia Bones travelled to Azkaban on a Thursday in January, in weather that was doing its full commitment to the North Sea in winter. The island appeared from the grey water like a thought you hadn't wanted to have. Dark stone, high walls, the particular architecture of a building designed to hold people inside rather than keep things out. She had visited Azkaban before. It was her institution. Her department administered it. She had interviewed prisoners here, inspected conditions, filed reports. She had not developed an immunity to the approach. No one did. The Dementors were stationed at the gate and along the outer wall, and even at this distance she could feel the warmth draining out of the air, the sense of things becoming smaller and colder and less worth having. She set her jaw and went through the gate. The escort took her to level 4. The cell was at the end of the corridor. Sirius Black was gaunt. He had been handsome once. You could see it in the architecture of the face, which was good bones under 10 years of Dementor exposure. His hair was long and tangled. His grey eyes were very clear. He was sitting on the bench in the posture of someone who was conserving something, and had been for a long time, and when the door opened, he looked up, and the clarity in his eyes was not the dull flatness she was accustomed to seeing in Azkaban cells. It was attention. It was thought. "Madam Bones," he said. He said it as if he had expected her, which was strange, because she had not announced herself. "Mr. Black." She sat across from him. "I have some questions. I have one first." His voice was rough and even. "Harry Potter. Is the boy alive?" She studied him. "He is. He's at Hogwarts." Something moved in his face, fast and not entirely suppressed. He looked at the wall for a moment, and did not look back until he had it controlled. She noted the effort it cost him. "I did not murder Peter Pettigrew," he said. "I did not murder 12 muggles. I am Harry Potter's godfather. I have been in this cell for 10 years without a trial, and I want to know what it is you've come here to find out." She opened her notebook. "Start," she said, "from the beginning." He talked for 2 hours. He told her about the secret keeper arrangement, that James had chosen Pettigrew at the last moment, not Sirius, because Sirius had argued that he was too obvious a choice, and Pettigrew was someone Voldemort would never suspect. He told her that Pettigrew had gone to Voldemort within a week. He told her that after the Potters died, he had found Pettigrew in a Muggle street, and Pettigrew had screamed about Sirius's betrayal for an audience of bystanders, and then blasted the street and cut off his own finger and transformed. He told her that Pettigrew was an unregistered animagus. He told her what form. A rat. He had been a rat. She wrote all of it down. She wrote it carefully, noting the details, the specificity of the finger, the audience, the timing, the form. She did not believe him. Or she did not yet believe him. She was scrupulous about the difference. She was a woman who had found a child sleeping in a cupboard for 10 years because she had looked at a letter address. She had learned that the gap between what people assumed was certain and what was actually documented could contain any number of things, and that the work of her department was to close that gap, not to stand comfortably outside it. Sirius Black had been in this cell for 10 years without a trial. That part was documented. She took her notes and rowed the boat back to the mainland in the January cold, and by the time she reached the shore, she had already begun to consider what kind of investigation would be required to find a rat. By February they knew the shape of it. Not everything. Not who. Not when. But the shape. Beneath the trap door on the 3rd floor, behind a sequence of enchanted obstacles, was the Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel's stone, the creator of the elixir of life. The reason a man who had first formulated it 6 centuries ago was still alive and apparently on friendly terms with the headmaster of Hogwarts. Someone in this castle wanted it. Someone was working toward it. The 3 of them had spent the winter accumulating evidence, and the spring assembling it into something that had the structure, if not yet the certainty, of a theory. They thought it was Snape. This was not unreasonable, given the evidence. Snape was seen in the 3rd floor corridor 3 times in January, and twice in February at odd hours, and once at what Harry would have sworn was the door itself. He was potions master, and his knowledge of the enchantments would have been considerable. He moved through the castle as though he was keeping an eye on something. The behavior was consistent, and behavior that was consistent had a reason. The defense against the dark arts professor moved differently. He had always been anxious. A nervous quality had trailed him since September, a slight tremor in the hands, a tendency to flinch from the direct encounter. But in the spring term, it had worsened into something that looked less like nerves and more like fear. He was afraid of something. When Snape came near him, his hands tightened. He avoided the 3rd floor corridor entirely. Harry had watched him carefully for weeks, and what he saw was the behavior not of a man pursuing something, but of a man pursued. He filed this away. He was not sure what to do with it yet. In February, Amelia Bones filed a formal petition with the Wizengamot to review the case of Sirius Orion Black, committed to Azkaban 2nd November 1981, without trial or formal proceedings. Within a week, Cornelius Fudge called her into his office. He had arranged himself behind his desk with the careful warmth of a man who had prepared what he intended to say and was going to say it gently. "Amelia," he said, "I have the greatest respect for. I want you to know this comes from a place of genuine. I'm simply asking you to consider the optics of this situation." She waited. "It could be seen as," he said, turning his bowler over in his hands, "somewhat embarrassing. For the ministry. To revisit a matter of this, a case that was resolved quite clearly and publicly during a period of considerable national." He stopped. "Embarrassing," he said again, as though the word gained weight through repetition. "What is more embarrassing," Amelia said, "imprisoning an innocent man for 10 years without a trial, or correcting it?" He looked at the surface of his desk. "He is not necessarily innocent. That is precisely the kind of language that tends to— There is no trial record. There is no charge sheet. There is no documented evidence hearing. There is an arrest report and a signature from my predecessor, and 10 years of a man sitting in Azkaban." She looked at him steadily. "I would like a Wizengamot review." He told her to sit on the petition for a while, to wait for a better moment, to consider the broader political landscape. She did not commit to this. She went back to her office and noted the date and the conversation and the words he had used, and added the notation to the Sirius Black file. Lupin's second letter arrived in March. Like the first, it was written on worn parchment in careful handwriting, with the particular hesitance of someone choosing words with the awareness that letters could be read by other eyes. He said he had been hearing things, that Amelia Bones at the ministry was asking questions about the Black case, that this had been mentioned by people he would not name. He said, "I knew Sirius Black. I cannot tell you more than that in a letter, because the context required for it is more than a letter can carry." He crossed out a sentence Harry could almost read. Something about the summer, about Hogwarts, struck through with 3 horizontal lines. He said, "Write back, please." Harry read the letter twice and thought about what had been crossed out. He wrote back. The Quidditch match was in May. Gryffindor versus Hufflepuff. Bright afternoon. The pitch wide and green below. Harry on his broomstick at altitude, doing what he was better at than almost anything else in his life, which was watching a small space of air very carefully. The broom went wrong between 1 second and the next. Not wrong in the way of wind or interference, but wrong in the way of something being done to it, something that made it want to throw him, bucking and spinning with a sudden purposefulness that had nothing to do with how he was directing it. The sky tilted. His hands were the only thing between him and a 50-foot fall, and it was not a comfortable margin. He held on with his hands and his knees and the particular determination of someone who had decided not to fall, and below him on the stands he could see the commotion of reaction. Hermione saw it too. She saw the trajectory of Snape's gaze, locked on Harry, unblinking, lips moving. And she made a decision. She pushed through the crowd in the stands and knocked hard into Snape's row, hard enough to break the eye contact for 3 uninterrupted seconds. The broom stopped. Harry landed, shaking, and looked at the stand where Hermione was picking herself up beside Snape, who was examining her with an expression that was cold and entirely unreadable. Harry noted that. He also noted, looking slightly past Snape to the far end of the teacher's stand, that the defense professor was sitting very still and watching Harry with his pale, wide eyes, and that his hands were pressed flat on his knees. He filed that too. Snape's locked gaze, the broom, the 3 seconds of contact, broken. The defense professor's flat hands, the careful stillness, those pale eyes. He was building a picture, and he did not yet entirely understand what it was a picture of. Dumbledore left on the last day of May. Harry was at breakfast when the owls came, a formal post, ministry seal, and watched from the Gryffindor table as the headmaster stood, folded the letter, and spoke briefly to Professor McGonagall. She looked at him for a moment. He left the hall without speaking to anyone else. He went to Hermione. "Someone sent him away," he said. "Someone at the ministry," Hermione said. "An urgent letter." "Someone who knew the stone was here," Harry said. "Someone who knew that Dumbledore leaving was what the stone needed to be vulnerable." He looked at Ron. "Tonight," he said. "It has to be tonight. Whoever is going for it will go tonight." Ron looked at him. "You're not suggesting—" "We know the defenses," Harry said. "We've had 6 months to figure them out. Fluffy, the snare, the keys, the chess, the potions puzzle." He looked at the table. "If we go through and someone is already in there, we're the only people who are going to know about it." Hermione pressed her lips together. She was thinking through the counter-arguments and dismissing them in order, which Harry had learned to recognize by her expression. "The chess room will be the problem," Ron said. He had gone quiet in a way Harry recognized, not uncertain, but working through something. "I've been thinking about it since January, since we first mapped the whole sequence." He paused. "I can get you through. I know what move it'll take. I know what it'll cost." "Ron," Hermione said. "I know," he said. "I've thought about it." He looked at Harry. You need to get to the end. I'll get you there." They looked at each other. "Right," Ron said. "After dinner, then." Fluffy was asleep. That was the first wrong thing. They had prepared for Fluffy to be awake, had agreed that Hermione would use a singing charm on the way down, that they would be fast, that there would be a moment of the dog's enormous head swinging toward them, and they would need to move before it swung back. Instead, the trap door opened, and the sound of music came up through it, thin and oddly gentle, from a small enchanted harp already playing itself in the corner of the room. Fluffy, all three heads of Fluffy, was deeply, rhythmically asleep. Someone had come through ahead of them. There was no time to discuss this. They went through the trap door in order, Harry, then Hermione, then Ron, dropping into the darkness below. The plant had been here long enough to grow thick. It filled the chamber in broad, moving ropes of vegetation, and the moment they landed, it began to tighten around them. Not slowly, with the particular purpose of something that had evolved specifically to do this. Harry felt it close around his arms and fought it, and made it worse. Beside him, he could hear Ron doing the same. The darkness pressed down, the plant pressed tighter. Then light. Blue-white fire, blooming suddenly from Hermione's wand in the dark, flooding the chamber, and the plant recoiled, fast in the way of something that had met its weakness and wanted very much to stop meeting it. Harry hit the floor. He pulled air into his lungs and did not think about how close that had been. "I had it," Hermione said, calmly, picking herself up. She had been frightened for about 2 seconds. The 2 seconds were already over. The next chamber held a ceiling of darkness and the sound of something moving in it. Thousands of wing beats, small and urgent, swarming. Keys. Winged keys, hundreds of them, and somewhere in the cloud a single one with a broken feather that turned sideways when it moved. Harry saw a broomstick leaning against the wall. He was on it before the others could speak. He found the key in 40 seconds, which was faster than he'd found anything in Quidditch and slower than he wanted. The lock turned. The door swung. The chess room on the other side was larger than it had any right to be, and the pieces that occupied it were the size of horses. Ron looked at the board for a long moment. "Get behind me," he said. "Both of you. Don't move anything. Don't say anything." He sat down at the edge of the board and looked at the arrangement of pieces, and Harry watched his face do the thing it did in the common room, which was to go still and precise in a way that was different from his usual expression, as though a different kind of attention had turned on. He played. It took 11 minutes, which was the longest 11 minutes Harry had experienced, including several he had spent in a cupboard under the stairs. Ron moved pieces and sacrificed pieces, and did both with the same concentrated calm, and the white pieces moved in their counterattacks, and Ron countered back. Harry watched and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and Ron didn't need him to say it. Then Ron stood up and walked to the center of the board, to a specific square, and stopped. "Knight to H5, he said. The Queen moved. She was 10 feet tall and made of white stone, and she swung with everything she had. Ron caught the impact with his shoulder and went down. "Go," he said, from the floor. His voice was even. "I'm all right. Just go." Harry looked at him for one moment, on the floor, pale, breathing, and looked at the door on the other side of the board, and went. He went because Ron had made a decision that required him to, and the only correct response to that kind of decision was to use it. The door on the far side opened to a chamber with 7 bottles on a table, and a wall of black flame ahead and purple flame behind, and Hermione standing over the bottles with the expression she wore when she was very quickly being sure. "Logic," she said to herself, as much as to Harry. "Not magic, Logic. She walked the bottles, reading them, reasoning through it. She pointed. That one. That's what you need for the black flame. It's a forward dose, enough for one person. She picked up the smallest bottle. The purple flame. I'll go back. I'll get help. Hermione, one person fits through. It has to be you. She pressed the small bottle into his hands. Find it. Don't use it. Just find it. That's all. She went back through the purple flame and was gone. He drank the bottle and walked into the black flame and came out the other side. The last chamber was very quiet, lit by torchlight that came from no visible source, with the mirror of Erist at the far end, its gold frame glowing the same way it had glowed in December. Standing in front of it, facing the glass, was the defense professor. Harry stopped in the doorway. The professor turned. His turban was slightly askew. His face was expressionless in a way that was different from Snape's expressionlessness. Less controlled, more empty, as though what animated it was something borrowed. He looked at Harry. "Potter," he said. "I didn't expect you." "I know," Harry said. His hand was on his wand. "What does it show you?" "Nothing useful," said a second voice. It came from behind the defense professor, from the back of his head, where his turban was, thin and cold and measured. "It shows me a man holding a red stone. But the mirror requires belief. I cannot convince it." Harry had heard that voice before. Not in a room. In a dream. The dream he had sometimes. Green light and a sound like wind, before he was old enough to understand what it was. Cold, precise, the voice of someone who regarded pain as a tool rather than an experience. He knew who it was. He walked toward the mirror. The professor stepped aside, slowly, not quite blocking, not quite allowing. Harry stood in front of the glass and looked. He saw James and Lily. He always saw James and Lily. He had known since December that this was what the mirror would show him. He had been in this room before. He knew their faces from Lupin's photographs, from Hagrid's descriptions, from the particular architecture of grief he had been building for 8 months. They stood beside him in the mirror, alive, present, and he looked at them and understood in a cold, clear way that this was what was taken from him. Not an abstraction, specific people, their names, their faces, the way his mother tilted her head in photographs, and the way his father stood. He was not standing here to find comfort. He was standing here to find a stone. He reached toward the mirror in his mind, reached with the precise, specific want of someone who needed to hold something in order to protect it, and felt something drop into his pocket. He did not look down. The defense professor's eyes moved to Harry's pocket. He lunged. His hands came down on Harry's wrists and then stopped. Harry looked at the professor's hands. They were blistering. White, then red, then the tight, painful red of something burned. And the defense professor wrenched his hands back and made a sound that was as much shock as pain. And from the back of his head, the thin voice screamed. Harry held the stone in his pocket and watched this happen and understood it. Not the bond of blood, that was gone. Broken on the July evening, he had walked through a gate on Privet Drive and not looked back. The bond had lived in a house and required a house, and when he had left it, he had taken nothing of it with him. This was something else. This was older. This lived in the burn on the defense professor's hands, and in the particular frequency of the scream from the back of his head. This was his mother, who had stood between him and a killing curse and refused to step aside, and whose love had been strong enough to become its own kind of physics, its own inviolable law. She had put it in him. Not in a house, not in a charm that could be managed and located and broken. in him. He held the stone and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The defense professor fell. Dumbledore arrived 3 minutes later, which was 2 minutes and 45 seconds after Voldemort's wraith abandoned its host and screamed out through the ceiling into the darkness, and which was close enough to look like it might not matter. He took the stone from Harry's pocket with the particular gentleness of something very old being handled carefully. He looked at Quirrell's body. He looked at the mirror. He looked at Harry on the floor. He sat down beside Harry on the stone and was quiet for a moment. "Your mother's love did not live in a house, Harry," he said. "I should have known that. I am sorry that I forgot." Harry looked at his wrists, where the professor's burned hands had been. The skin was unbroken. "I know," he said. He was very tired. "I figured that out." Dumbledore was quiet for another moment. "Yes," he said. "I imagine you did." He woke to the sound of someone eating something loudly and badly. Hagrid was in the chair beside the bed. He had a large paper bag on his knee that appeared to contain chocolate frogs, which he was eating with the concentrated attention of a man who was not thinking about chocolate frogs. His eyes were red. When Harry moved, he looked up immediately, which meant he had not been as absorbed as he appeared. "You're awake," he said. "Yes," Harry said. He felt as though he had been asleep for a very long time, which turned out to be accurate. 3 days, Madame Pomfrey informed him when she swept in to take his readings, and then swept back out again with a look that indicated further conversation with other visitors was medically inadvisable, but she would not be enforcing this. Hagrid had brought chocolate frogs and a rock cake, which he produced from a different pocket and set on the bedside table with the quiet care of someone offering a meaningful thing. Harry looked at the rock cake. He had been eating Hagrid's rock cakes for almost a year now, and he had learned that the appropriate response to them was to eat them without making any assessment of the experience. He ate it. Hagrid watched him do this, and his face did the thing it had been doing since July, the thing that was grief and relief in equal parts, sitting in the same expression and not resolved. "Hagrid," Harry said, "I'm all right." "Yeah," said Hagrid. I know you are." He looked at his hands. I'm very glad, is all." "I know," Harry said. They sat together for a while, which was enough. Dumbledore came later that afternoon, without the blue eyes twinkling and without the performance of ease. He sat in the chair Hagrid had vacated and was quiet for a moment, genuinely quiet, in the way of someone who had decided not to arrange themselves before speaking. He told Harry about the stone. Nicholas Flamel had been consulted, he said. Had in fact been consulted before. The stone's removal to Hogwarts had been Flamel's own decision, for reasons that had become relevant. What remained relevant now was Flamel's second decision, that the stone should not be remade, that he and his wife would take what time the elixir remaining allowed them, and that the stone itself should be destroyed. He had made this choice with full understanding of what it meant. Harry thought about a man 6 centuries old, choosing to be finished. Was he afraid? He said. I believe, Dumbledore said, that he had had enough time to know the difference between fear and readiness. He looked at his hands. The stone is destroyed. What was beneath the trap-door at Hogwarts is over. Harry waited. There is something else I should have told you earlier, Dumbledore said. I told myself it was not the right moment. I have told myself that before, about things that deserved a better accounting. He looked at Harry directly. The protection on you, what Quirrell encountered, that is not the bond of blood. The bond lived in Petunia Dursley's house, and it died when you walked away from it. And it was my design, and it served its purpose, and it is gone. But what burned Quirrell's hands is not gone, and has never been conditional on a house. It came from your mother, from the precise quality of her love and the precise quality of the choice she made." He stopped. The bond amplified it, extended it, made it addressable to a location. But it was never the source. The source was her. It has been her all along, and it will not diminish. Harry looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I know," he said. "I worked that out." "When it happened?" "Yes," Dumbledore said. "I imagined you might." He paused. "I am still sorry I forgot to say it earlier." Harry thought that was probably the right thing to have said, and did not make it easier by saying so. The feast was on a Thursday, the ceiling of the great hall reflecting a night that was warm and cloud-free in the way of June committing to itself. Harry sat between Ron, who had a set of bruised ribs and a certificate from Madame Pomfrey, and the expression of someone who had done something he was proud of, and Hermione, who had arrived at the feast with a schedule for summer reading, and the composure of someone who had descended through a trap door under Hogwarts and found it educational. Neville was across the table, working through a plate of roast potatoes with the focused contentment of a person who had recently been told he'd earned 10 points for Gryffindor, through what McGonagall described as botanical loyalty under pressure. He looked up when he felt Harry looking, and then looked back at his potatoes. He had the good quality of not making things more complicated than they were. At the staff table, Hagrid raised his goblet in a wide arc and winked. Harry went back to eating. After the feast, Dumbledore found him in the entrance hall with his trunk beside him, and Hedwig, in her cage on top of it, regarding the assembled students with the composure of an owl who had decided that humans in bulk were a manageable situation. "Where am I going?" Harry said. "Somewhere safe," Dumbledore said. "Hagrid will take you. The arrangement is temporary but adequate for the summer. I have been working on something more permanent. You will be told when it is settled." Harry looked at him. "You could just tell me now." "I could," Dumbledore agreed. "I am choosing not to, because the arrangement is not yet complete, and I have learned that partial information often produces more anxiety than none." He looked at Harry with the eyes that were not, today, twinkling. "I am trying to do better." Harry considered this. "Okay," he said. He wasn't entirely satisfied with it. He had not expected to be. Hagrid appeared from the crowd with the large, purposeful movement of someone who had found parking for a motorcycle somewhere and wanted to return to it. He looked at Harry's trunk and picked it up with one hand. He looked at Hedwig's cage and decided that Harry could carry that one. "Ready?" he said. Harry looked back at the castle, the torchlit entrance, the stone arch, the sound of 500 students gradually dispersing into the June night. He looked at Gryffindor Tower without being able to see it from this angle, and at the corridor where he knew the library was, and at the general direction of Hagrid's hut. "Yes," he said. "Ready." He followed Hagrid out into the evening. At the Ministry of Magic, 3 days later, Amelia Bones arrived at her desk at 7:30, and opened her briefcase and took out a document she had been carrying for 2 weeks without a better occasion on which to act. A formal petition to the Wizengamot for review of the imprisonment of Sirius Orion Black, committed set of November 1981 on charges of murder, without a trial, without a hearing, without legal representation at any stage of proceedings. She had drafted it in March. She had amended it in April. She had carried it since June, and she had not asked Fudge for permission again, and she did not intend to. She read it once more. She picked up her quill. She signed her name in the clean, wide signature she used for things that needed to be clearly, inarguably hers. She set the quill down. She reached for the next file. Harry was on a train going north, with Hedwig's cage balanced on his knees and a trunk so heavy it had taken Hagrid one hand and the physical assistance of a trolley to get it into the overhead rack. In his inside pocket was the letter Lupin had sent in March. Still folded, the photographs inside, James and Lily at Hogwarts, laughing at something off to the left of the frame. He was 11 years old. He knew who his parents had been. He knew what they had looked like, and some of what they had been like, and he knew what his mother had done on the night she died, and what she had left behind when she did it. He knew he was a wizard. He knew that somewhere in the North Sea a man named Sirius Black was in Azkaban, and had been for 10 years without a trial, and that someone at the ministry was working on that, and that the man had been his father's friend. He didn't know yet what he was going to do with all of it. He looked out the window at the countryside going past. Green, unhurried, the afternoon light spreading over it in the ordinary way of light that had no particular reason to be anything other